This is the Dutch flag, and last week it was Koningsdag, which means King's Day, which means everyone gets dressed up in orange and is very happy about being Dutch. This may lead some people to ask, well, if we're so happy about orange, why isn't the Dutch flag orange? And I would say that's an excellent question for a video. I made it about 2 years ago. You can watch it, link is in the description. However, this is kind of a part 2 to this video, because while in this video I explain why there was this variation between an orange version of the Dutch flag and a red version of the Dutch flag, in this video I'm going to explain why the orange version never came back and why it's actually kind of shunned as a flag by many people in the Netherlands and internationally to this day. Alright, so in the Netherlands, this flag actually has a particular name. It's called the Prinsenvlag, which means the prince's flag. This is because it's related to the House of Orange, of course the Princes of Orange, which became the ruling family in the Netherlands. This was already the case in the Dutch Republic, where they came to fill a role called the stadhouder. These stadhouders were quite clever, and in 1688, one of them managed to capture for himself the crowns of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Wales was included within it, and they called it the Glorious Revolution. I also actually made a video about this not too long ago. Now, while the man that did this, the Dutch stadhouder, would become King William of England, Ireland and Scotland, he would remain only a stadhouder because the Netherlands at the time was the Dutch Republic, and so it did not have a king, even if the stadhouder slowly became more and more powerful over time. In actual fact, in the Netherlands, there were two dividing parties of people who either were more in favor of the stadhouder having more monarchic-like role, or those who were more in favor of the old-fashioned kind of, well, I say old-fashioned, it was pretty revolutionary at the time, but the more traditional republic role, where there isn't a single figurehead of the state. And these two arguing parties became distinguished by either their love for or their opposition against the house, and so also the colour of orange. And so we can see a distinction between those being very in favour of the stadhouders and the family of orange, using the orange, white and blue flag, while those who were more in favour of the state would use the Statenvlag, or the state's flag, which was the red, white and blue version. Now, this would continue to brew throughout the end of the 17th century and into the 18th century. And towards the 18th century, actually, this would lead to full-scale war in the Dutch Republic, leading to what was called the Patriotten takeover in 1795, or the Batavian Revolution. This being the introduction of a new state that would be called the Batavian Republic, after the French, who had just had their own revolution, of course, would aid those patriotic rebels, as they were called, against the House of Orange and kick out the House of Orange from the Dutch Republic and thus create the Batavian Republic. Given their republican leanings, it's not surprising that the Batavian Republic lent more towards the red, white and blue Statenvlag rather than the House of Orange, as actually they kicked out the House of Orange. And so they created their own flag, which they added a jack to. That's that little emblem in the corner that we see, which involved several other symbols of the republican movements that were sweeping Europe. Of course, the French had done it first, and so there's some inspiration there. We have the Leo Belgica, so the Belgian or the Hollandic lion there. We have the Maid of Holland, sometimes called the Freedom Maid, and various other symbols coming on this flag. What's interesting, however, is that the Dutch Navy, which fought on the side of the French and their allies against the British and others, actually refused to fly this new flag. They were so attached to the former flag, with which one imagines they mean the orange, white and blue flag, that even though they had been fighting those who were allied to the House of Orange, they were so attached to the flag that they didn't want to raise the Batavian Republic's new flag with their emblem in the corner. Now, in 1806, the Batavian Republic would be dissolved and the Kingdom of Holland would be created in its stead. And that would be ruled by one of Napoleon's brothers, Louis, or Lodewijk to use the Dutch name, and the flag would be changed to having just a pure red stripe on the top rather than having this jack there too. Now, the House of Orange wasn't dormant during this time. They fled to England and fought in various other campaigns, both in Flanders when an Anglo-Russian invasion occurred there, as well as going over to what's today Germany to fight against Napoleon. Now, of course, there was a very rocky road fighting against Napoleon, but the Stadtholder Willem managed to survive, and in 1813, when the tide was really turned against Napoleon, he managed to return to the Netherlands, returning to Scheveningen, where he was embraced by the local population who came out to meet him, and many who saw him as liberator. Now, this is an image from 1913, so the 100 years anniversary of this event of when he returned. And as we can see, this is an imagining of him returning to Scheveningen and the people coming out to meet him. And what we see here are a variety of different flags. So we have the red, white and blue flags, but we also have some orange, white and blue and some pure orange banners. Now what we also see, interestingly enough, are several wimples of various colours above the flags, whether they're red or orange. This is quite interesting because this is obviously a reimagining from 100 years later of what the flag situation was like in 1813. But there are a few pointers that make this quite interesting. Now, in 1815, 2 years later, they would have to fight because, of course, the French came back, Napoleon returned, and the Battle of Waterloo was fought in what was then the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. And quite a large proportion of the Allied forces that defeated the French were also Dutch at that point. This is a painting from a little bit closer to 1813, and in this one we see that some pure orange flags are being used, and from descriptions of the time it seems that that was quite common to have a pure orange flag, but then also to just have a red, white and blue flag as the flag to symbolize the Netherlands, which is a little bit different from what we see with all of these variety of flags in this later painting. What may already have become a point here is to add a pure orange flag as a symbol for the House of Orange rather than using the Prinsenvlag, so to have the whole stripe orange to represent the House of Orange at this point. This may be because during the French occupation it was illegal to fly the Prinsenvlag and the actual national flag was the red, white and blue flag. So maybe it's just the case that people had these flags and by adding a little bit of orange they could turn it into a pro-orangist flag. And having just that little bit of orange meant you were showing your alliance to the right side, whereas before you were not allowed to have orange, white and blue. Perhaps that's what's going on here. But the Prinsenvlag didn't disappear from history, and nor was it forgotten. In fact, we know in 1864, which marked the anniversary of the reconstitution of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which happened in 1814, the 50-year anniversary, we can read this. It's been translated from the newspaper Tijdspiegel. It reads, "The dispute about the colours of the national flag was renewed. Should it be red, white and blue, or orange, white and blue? Or should it be, for this occasion, pure and solely orange? A difficult question. But orange should be part of it, and for that reason, many attach the orange pennant to the national tricolour." So here we have the fact that this debate is very much still raging about orange, white and blue, or red, white and blue. Or should it simply be a pure orange flag? So we see all of these options on the various paintings that we have of this period, but we also have at the end of the quotation quite an interesting third solution, that there should be an orange pennant added to a red, white and blue flag, which coincidentally actually is what the royal family does to this day, and that's the official standard now for flying the Dutch flag on specific days, is to have red, white and blue as the main colours, and then also to have an orange pennant to symbolize connection to the House of Orange. Now, you may remember though from various other videos that I've done, including this one on the old South African flag, that the Prinsenvlag was also not forgotten around the world, particularly in places where Dutch settlers had established colonies in far-flung continents. So perhaps it's at this point, because now the Netherlands was going towards having a red, white and blue flag, that the Prinsenvlag became less attached to the state of the Netherlands and so became more of a symbol of Dutch ancestry ancestry and Dutch heritage, which was able to be used without necessarily proclaiming allegiance to the modern state of the Netherlands, which may be why we see these flags appearing here. For instance, in 1909, we have this being adopted, of course, using the Prinsenvlag as the base for the state of Albany in New York, or I should say the city of Albany in New York. Finally, this one is of the Bronx in New York, and this one is of New York City itself, which were all adopted in the 1910s, showing that this was a popular motif that was known in New York at this point, and obviously points back to the history of New Amsterdam. Now, this may be some of the reason why in the Netherlands in the 1920s and particularly in the 1930s, the Prinsenvlag became popular again, and this debate that clearly had been around into the 1860s was either renewed or continued to flare up. This is what really the crux of the modern issue about the Prinsenvlag is about. This is actually a really good research that has been done on the whole development of the Dutch flag by Jos Poels, which I'll link in the description below. And he writes about this period: in the 1930s, just before the outbreak of World War II, the Netherlands was torn for a third time in its history by the vexing question of the colour of the stripe of the flag. Just as in the 18th and 19th centuries, some people were convinced that orange, white and blue were the true colours of the Dutch flag. All political parties had members who supported the idea of changing the red stripe of the flag to orange. The colour issue divided the entire country. What's interesting here is that it seems that this was something that across political parties had different supporters. And we actually see this manifest in various ways, such as that in 1932, the Vereniging de Prinsenvlag was created. This being a union to officially try and pressure the government into changing the flag into orange, white and blue, one which was found throughout the country, showing it wasn't simply a regional or political issue, but rather that various swathes of society were in favour of doing this, although it's unsure if they actually reached a majority. In 1937, this even led the Dutch Parliament to pass basically a bill which stipulated in its first statute that the official colours of the Dutch flag were red, white and blue. So this being the first time that we officially hear what the correct colours of the Dutch flag actually were. However, the modern controversy surrounding the Prinsenvlag wouldn't nearly be so complicated if it weren't for the involvement of a certain group of people with this flag. Let me introduce the NSB. They stand for, in Dutch, the Nationaal Socialistische Beweging, the National Socialist Movement. While they had been founded in the early 1930s as a group that had many traditionalist leanings, to put it lightly, they soon became the Nazi arm of the National Socialist Movement, emanating from Germany, taking inspiration from both the fascists in Italy and from the Nazis in Germany. This group also adopted the Prinsenvlag as one of its symbols, often using it at their rallies and other organizations, and indeed including it in the emblem of their organization that also appeared on their flag, together with the colors of black and red, imitating a certain someone in Germany at the same time. This is actually archive footage of a propaganda film of theirs where they're raising all the flags of the fascist countries at that time. So here they had a Portuguese flag, which I think is particularly ironic given that the Prinsenvlag was the flag the Dutch used for about, give or take, 100 years when they fought the Portuguese up and down the length and breadth of the globe and stole most of their colonies. But hey ho. And here, of course, we see their allegiances to the Nazis in Germany, and the final flag that they raise in this little propaganda clip is the Prinsenvlag. This also gave them a reason to be sort of Dutch and claiming to embody the kind of Dutch spirit without using the national flag, which had obviously been officially in 1937 made the red, white, blue flag, as they wanted to overthrow the democratically elected Dutch government and instead be ruled from Germany, which of course is what would happen following the 1940 invasion. The NSB would help the Nazis to rule in the Netherlands, supplying for them soldiers for the Dutch SS who would go out and fight against the Soviets on the Eastern Front, as well as identifying and rounding up Jews and other resistance fighters throughout the occupation of the Netherlands. Now, this obviously seems like quite a good ground why this flag became quite the controversial symbol, because of course of the suffering that the NSB caused and their prominent display and use of the flag. And pretty much this flag today is still associated with this past outside of clear and obvious historical context. So for example, if you're shooting a film set in the 17th century, it makes sense to use this flag. But if using it in a lot of modern settings without context, it can often raise eyebrows with Dutch people. This may be also reinforced by the fact that the flag of South Africa during the apartheid years featured a very similar design, and of course that now is also associated with the racism from that period. And so today this is still a controversial flag. It's often associated with racism in the Netherlands, but not by everyone. And it is an interesting question whether the NSB has completely ruined the use of this flag. One may argue, in fact, that the NSB was so clearly being dominated by the Germans. They actually denounced the royal family completely and said that the Dutch should work together with the Germans, which is again rather ironic, given that the orange in the Prinsenvlag is from the House of Orange, the one that they actually betrayed, and argued Dutch people should fight against whilst using their version of Dutch flag. But in any case, it is rather a symbol that is not seen very often in the Netherlands, and it's in very limited context that it's seen. So there is some discussion about this flag a lot of the time with people outside of the Netherlands who don't know this particular political context to the flag, perhaps wondering why it's not found more often. Now, there can be a discussion about, well, should the fact that the NSB used it for these around 10 years mean that we can never use it again? But that is a discussion that has to happen, and currently there is not a lot of favor for this flag being used in that context. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this issue. Are you Dutch? Have you got an interest in this? Are you South African? What do you think about the color combination? Aesthetically, I think the orange, white and blue looks cool, but of course I understand the historical context, and it's something that is important to keep in mind with these kinds of symbols when we are using them. Now, of course, outside of the Netherlands, it is still used by a lot of states in the New York area, in North America, and indeed it's used or was used on some of the Boere flags of the Boer republics in South Africa and in some other places too. But anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History.